The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of the research vessel Horizon, their crimson light painting everything in a blood-red hue. Emma Rodriguez gripped the edge of her workstation, her fingers leaving faint indentations in the reinforced graphene surface. Outside the view screen, the vast emptiness of deep space had transformed from a familiar backdrop to a potential tomb. 3 standard hours ago, this had been a routine biological research mission. The Horizon was designed as the most advanced mobile research platform humanity had ever constructed, a testament to human engineering that could operate for years without resupply. Its mission: to explore the outer reaches of the Sagittarius Arm, collecting data on potentially habitable exoplanets and analyzing exotic biological samples. Emma was no ordinary researcher. At 32, she had already revolutionized 3 separate fields of xenobiology, with publications that made her a legend in scientific circles. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, strands escaping from the intense concentration that had defined her entire career. The ship's computers were an extension of her own consciousness, processing terabytes of data with each passing second. The first sign of trouble came as a quantum disruption in the ship's navigational systems. Most captains would have called for a diagnostic. Captain Michael Chen, a veteran of deep space exploration, knew better. He looked to Emma, the mission's lead researcher, with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Rodriguez," he called, "those readings aren't natural." She was already running a multispectral analysis, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. The quantum disruption was unlike anything in human scientific records. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a deliberate interference. "We're being targeted," Emma said, her voice calm despite the implications. "Something is cutting through our quantum shielding like it's tissue paper." The Horizon's advanced stealth systems should have made it invisible to any known tracking technology. Yet something was approaching. Something massive. The ship's external sensors began to register a structure that defied human understanding. Crystalline geometric patterns shifted and reconfigured, suggesting a level of technological sophistication that made human engineering look like child's play. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, prepare for potential first contact scenario." This is not a drill. Emma's mind raced. First contact protocols were clear, but this was something else entirely. The approaching vessel, if it could even be called a vessel, seemed to bend the very fabric of space around it. Gravitational readings fluctuated wildly, suggesting technologies so advanced they bordered on the magical. Then they came into visual range. The Jarin diplomatic ship was a nightmare of crystalline geometry, its structure defying every known principle of spacecraft design. It seemed to pulse with an internal light, segments shifting and reconfiguring in patterns that suggested a living intelligence. Multiple appendages, too organic to be called docking arms, too mechanical to be considered biological, extended toward the horizon. "They're not attempting communication," the ship's communication officer reported, his voice tight with tension. "They're preparing for direct interface." Emma knew this was beyond standard first contact. Something fundamental was about to change, not just for her, but for humanity's entire understanding of its place in the universe. A sudden surge of energy caught everyone by surprise. The ship's quantum shields collapsed in a cascade of light, and Emma felt a strange resonance, as if something was scanning not just the ship, but her personally. Her research, her genetic profile, her entire existence was being analyzed in a fraction of a second. Captain Chen's hand moved to the emergency containment protocols, but it was already too late. The Jarin had made their choice. First contact was happening, and humanity was about to discover that being chosen was far more complicated than being discovered. Emma Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of a moment that would rewrite everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the cosmos. The universe had just changed its rules, and she was going to be the one to understand why. The transfer was anything but gentle. Emma felt every molecular bond in her body vibrate as the quantum transportation mechanism tore her from the horizon, and reassembled her within the heart of the Jaran diplomatic vessel. Her first breath came with a searing pain that spoke volumes about the fundamental differences between human and Jaran physiology. Crystalline walls surrounded her, shifting with colors that defied human visual perception. Each surface seemed alive, pulsing with information and energy that her most advanced scientific instruments would struggle to comprehend. The air itself felt different, heavier, charged with a complexity that suggested communication was happening on levels far beyond sound or electromagnetic waves. Two massive Jarans stood before her. Their bodies were a nightmare of scaled perfection, each movement calculated, each breath a potential weapon. The primary figure, clearly the dominant one, bore intricate markings that Emma immediately recognized as a complex social ranking system. Dozens of subtle color variations and geometric patterns told a story more nuanced than any human language. Emma Rodriguez, the lead Jaran, spoke, its voice a combination of subsonic vibrations and crystalline resonances that her translator struggled to process. "You have been selected." The word "selected" hung in the air like a threat. Emma knew enough about alien cultures to understand that this was no random choice. Her entire career, every research paper, every breakthrough, every unconventional methodology had been leading to this moment. Krelax, the diplomatic leader, moved with a predatory grace that suggested centuries of evolutionary refinement. His scaled skin shifted colors subtly, a biological communication system that most humans would completely miss. But Emma wasn't most humans. Years of xenobiological research had trained her to see beyond the obvious. She recognized the color shifts as emotional tells, micro-expressions of a complex internal dialogue. Krelax was simultaneously intrigued, threatened, and calculating, a cocktail of emotions that would paralyze most human diplomats. "I understand I'm here for more than simple scientific exchange," Emma responded, her voice steady. She chose her words carefully, knowing each syllable was being analyzed on multiple levels. The secondary Jaran, a lower-ranking official with muted scaling, activated a holographic display. Thousands of data points about Emma's life appeared, floating in three-dimensional space. Academic records, psychological profiles, genetic analysis, research publications, her entire existence laid bare. "Your species represents an anomaly," Krelax stated. It wasn't an insult. It was a clinical observation. Emma saw her opportunity. Instead of defending humanity, she leaned into the observation. "Anomalies are where scientific discovery begins," she replied, her fingers unconsciously tracing a complex neural pathway diagram from her most recent research. The holographic display flickered. The Jaran exchanged a rapid series of color shifts that suggested surprise. They hadn't expected her to embrace the description. Humans were supposed to be defensive, emotional, predictable. Emma was anything but. A complex diplomatic dance began. Each question from the Jaran was a probe, designed to reveal weaknesses. Each of Emma's responses was a carefully constructed puzzle, revealing just enough to intrigue, while protecting fundamental human capabilities. The marriage proposal, more a political mechanism than a romantic concept, was their solution to a growing problem. Humanity was expanding. The Jaran needed to understand this unpredictable species before conflict became inevitable. Emma recognized the underlying strategy immediately. This wasn't just about her. This was about preventing a potential galactic war through the most unexpected of diplomatic tools, strategic intimacy. Krelax watched her, his scaled form now a canvas of complex emotional revelations. He was beginning to understand that Emma Rodriguez was not a typical human. She was a strategic weapon disguised as a researcher, a diplomatic force that could reshape interstellar relationships with nothing more than her intellect and adaptability. The crystalline chamber seemed to pulse with potential. Something fundamental was about to change, not just between two individuals, but between two entire species. And Emma Rodriguez was going to make sure humanity came out on top. The first attempt on her life came precisely 72 hours after her arrival on the Jaran diplomatic vessel. Most would have missed the subtlety of the attack, a microscopic neural disruptor carefully integrated into her food synthesizer, designed to mimic a natural neural degradation process. But Emma Rodriguez was not most people. Her background in xenobiology had trained her to see patterns where others saw chaos. The molecular structure of the synthesized protein seemed off by 0.03%, an infinitesimal deviation that would have gone unnoticed by any other researcher. But to Emma, it was a glaring warning sign. She carefully collected the sample, her mind already racing through potential scenarios. This was no random assassination attempt. This was a message. The Jaren vessel was a marvel of living technology, its crystalline corridors shifting and reconfiguring with what seemed like sentient intelligence. But beneath the elegant surface, Emma could sense tension, a political undercurrent that threatened to tear the diplomatic mission apart. Krelax had been deliberately distant since their initial encounter. His color shifts suggested a complex internal struggle, part diplomatic calculation, part genuine uncertainty about how to handle this unpredictable human. Emma knew she was being watched, studied, and potentially set up as a sacrificial piece in a much larger political game. Her first step was to map the internal power structures of the Jaren diplomatic corps. Using a combination of advanced data analysis and the subtle body language clues she'd been studying, Emma began to construct a three-dimensional network of political relationships. The holographic display in her private quarters came alive with interconnected nodes, each representing a key Jaren official, color-coded based on their potential involvement in the conspiracy. Red indicated direct threat, yellow suggested potential alignment, green represented potential allies. Most researchers would have reported the assassination attempt immediately. Emma did something far more dangerous. She began to investigate silently. The ship's internal communication systems were a marvel of quantum entanglement technology. Most would see an impenetrable network. Emma saw a complex ecosystem of information waiting to be decoded. Her fingers danced across quantum interfaces, creating subtle infiltration protocols that would make most human cybersecurity experts weep with envy. Fragments of encrypted communications began to emerge. The conspiracy ran deeper than a simple assassination attempt. Someone within the Jaren diplomatic corps wanted more than her death. They wanted a complete breakdown of the human-Jaren diplomatic relationship. A secondary discovery sent a chill down her spine. The assassination attempt was linked to a radical military faction within the Jaren hierarchy, a group that viewed humanity's rapid technological advancement as an existential threat. They weren't just planning to eliminate her. They were planning to trigger an interstellar incident that would justify a preemptive strike against human colonies. The pieces began to connect. The quantum disruption that intercepted the horizon. The specific selection of her for this diplomatic mission. The carefully orchestrated attempts to create tension. It was all part of a larger plan. Emma realized she was no longer just a researcher or a diplomatic asset. She had become the focal point of a conspiracy that could spark a war between species. Krelax appeared at her quarters, his scaled form a complex canvas of color and emotion. "You have discovered more than you were meant to," he stated, his translator rendering the words with a mixture of threat and grudging respect. Emma met his gaze without flinching. "I was always going to discover more," she replied, her fingers subtly activating a quantum encryption protocol that would protect the data she had gathered. The game had changed. What began as a diplomatic mission had transformed into a high-stakes investigation that would determine the fate of two species. And Emma Rodriguez was determined to be several steps ahead of those who sought to manipulate her. The shadows of conspiracy were about to be exposed, whether the Jaren were ready or not. The Jaren social structure was a labyrinth of unspoken rules and intricate power dynamics. Most humans would have been crushed by its complexity. Emma Rodriguez saw it as the most fascinating puzzle she'd ever encountered. Her first ally emerged from the most unexpected place. Lyrax, a junior communication specialist with iridescent scales that suggested a unique genetic variation. Where other Jaren saw a rigid hierarchy, Emma recognized a potential outsider, someone who didn't quite fit the traditional mold. During a routine data transfer session, Emma deliberately introduced a minor quantum encryption challenge. It was a test, one that would reveal more about Lyrax than any direct interrogation could. The response came faster than she expected. A subtle quantum signature, elegantly crafted, solved the encryption puzzle with a creativity that defied standard Jurin protocols. Most would have overlooked the nuance. Emma recognized it immediately as an act of quiet rebellion. "Interesting approach," Emma commented, her translator rendering the words with just the right mix of professional respect and intellectual challenge. Lyrax's scales shifted through a spectrum that translated to cautious curiosity. The junior specialist had been watching Emma, not as a potential threat, but as an anomaly that demanded understanding. Their conversation began as a technical exchange. It evolved into something far more significant. Emma learned that Lyrax came from a marginalized genetic line within Jurin society. Brilliant, but perpetually overlooked. The parallels to her own academic journey were not lost on her. Strategic alliance building was an art form. Emma understood that information was the most valuable currency in any political ecosystem. She began to map the internal tensions within the Jurin diplomatic court, using Lyrax as an unexpected source of insider knowledge. The conspiracy she had uncovered ran deeper than initial investigations suggested. A military faction was preparing to manufacture a conflict between humans and Jurin, using her presence as a potential catalyst. But every complex system has its weak points, and Emma was determined to find them. Her next target was Vornak, a senior administrative officer whose color pattern suggested deep internal conflict. Most would see a loyal bureaucrat. Emma saw a potential pressure point. During a formal diplomatic briefing, she deliberately introduced a theoretical xenobiological scenario that challenged fundamental Jurin assumptions about interspecies communication. It was a calculated move, designed to provoke a response. Vornak's reaction was subtle but telling. A microscopic hesitation, a nearly imperceptible color shift that suggested internal doubt. Emma had found another potential ally. The pieces began to connect. Each conversation was a carefully constructed probe, designed to understand the complex political ecosystem she had been thrust into. She wasn't just gathering intelligence, she was rebuilding the entire political landscape from the inside. Krelax watched these interactions with a mixture of confusion and growing respect. The human was doing something unprecedented. She was navigating Jurin social structures with an intuition that defied everything in their diplomatic training. "You are rewriting the rules," Krelax observed during one of their increasingly frequent private consultations. Emma's response was characteristic in its simplicity. "Rules are just patterns waiting to be understood." The conspiracy was taking shape. The military faction believed they could manipulate the diplomatic mission, using Emma as a potential trigger for conflict. They didn't realize that by choosing her, they had made a fundamental miscalculation. Emma Rodriguez was not a passive piece to be moved on their political chessboard. She was the one redesigning the entire game. As the diplomatic vessel hurtled through the quantum-shifted space between star systems, a new form of alliance was taking shape. Humans and Jurin who didn't quite fit their society's expectations were finding each other, united by their ability to see beyond the obvious. The shadows of conspiracy were about to discover that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to turn potential threats into unexpected opportunities. The quantum laboratory was a cathedral of possibility. Crystalline interfaces that would have driven most human researchers to madness seemed to sing under Emma Rodriguez's touch. What the Jurin saw as an impenetrable technological ecosystem, she perceived as an intricate puzzle waiting to be solved. Her breakthrough began with a seemingly impossible challenge. The Jurin communication protocols relied on a quantum entanglement system so complex that most species would have abandoned the attempt within minutes. Emma saw it as an invitation. Hours blowed into days. The laboratory became her entire universe. Holographic models of quantum matrices danced around her, each projection a step closer to understanding. Lyra Axe watched in growing amazement as Emma reconstructed their most advanced communication technologies, not by copying, but by fundamentally reimagining them. The key was in the translation, not just of language, but of fundamental conceptual frameworks. Human neural networks processed information differently from Jurin quantum systems. Where others saw incompatibility, Emma saw an opportunity for radical integration. Her first prototype looked like nothing the Jurin had ever seen. A quantum communication interface that didn't just translate between species, but created an entirely new communication paradigm. It wasn't about converting one language to another. It was about creating a universal linguistic ecosystem that could adapt in real time. Krelax observed the initial tests with a mixture of scientific curiosity and barely concealed threat. The military faction that had sought to manipulate the diplomatic mission was about to discover the true meaning of human innovation. The breakthrough came during a seemingly routine data transfer. The prototype communication device, which Emma had nicknamed the Rosetta Bridge, began to do something unprecedented. It wasn't just translating. It was learning, evolving, creating new linguistic constructs that bridged the fundamental differences between human and Jurin cognitive processes. Vornak, the senior administrative officer who had become a reluctant ally, couldn't believe the readings. "This is impossible," he muttered, his translator rendering the words with a mixture of scientific awe and existential fear. Emma's response was characteristic in its simplicity. Impossible is just a failure of imagination. The implications were staggering. The Rosetta Bridge didn't just translate communication, it created a new form of interspecies understanding. It could potentially resolve conflicts before they even began, by providing a communication method that went beyond words, beyond cultural barriers. The military faction's plans began to unravel. Their carefully constructed narrative of human unpredictability and potential threat was being dismantled by a single device that demonstrated humanity's true strength: adaptive, creative problem-solving. Lyra Axe understood first. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could communicate. The color patterns of their scales shifted through complex emotional spectrums that suggested both excitement and profound existential challenge. Krelax called an emergency diplomatic session. The Jurin leadership would be forced to confront a technological reality that challenged everything they understood about interspecies communication. Emma knew the true battle was just beginning. The Rosetta Bridge was more than a communication device. It was a weapon of diplomacy, a tool that could prevent conflicts by creating unprecedented levels of understanding. The quantum laboratory hummed with potential. Outside, the vast emptiness of space seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how this single human researcher would reshape the fundamental rules of galactic interaction. Humanity had just introduced a technological wildcard that would force every known species to reconsider their understanding of communication, diplomacy, and coexistence. And Emma Rodriguez was just getting started. The attack came without warning. Quantum space erupted in a cascade of destructive energy that would have obliterated most defensive systems. The Jurin colony on Nexus Prime was about to face its greatest test, and humanity's most unconventional strategist was ready. Emma Rodriguez stood at the heart of the diplomatic vessel's command center, her presence a stark contrast to the panicked Jurin officers around her. While others saw chaos, she saw a complex system waiting to be understood and manipulated. The attacking force was a coalition of species that had long resented Jurin expansion, a carefully orchestrated alliance that believed they could exploit the current diplomatic tension between humans and Jurin. Their attack was precision-engineered to create maximum disruption, with minimum initial casualties, a psychological warfare strategy designed to break the Jurin's will to resist. Krelax turned to Emma, his scaled form a canvas of urgent color patterns. "Your species' military protocols," he demanded. "What would you do?" Most humans would have offered a traditional tactical response. Emma did something far more dangerous. She began to redesign the entire defensive strategy in real time. The Rosetta Bridge, her quantum communication device, became an unexpected weapon. Instead of traditional defensive countermeasures, Emma began to flood the attacking fleet's communication channels with a series of sophisticated psychological disruptions. Her approach was nothing short of revolutionary. She didn't just intercept communications. She began to introduce subtle cognitive dissonance into their tactical networks. Mathematical patterns that created just enough uncertainty to paralyze their decision-making processes. Linguistic constructs that introduced doubt into their most basic strategic assumptions. The first signs of confusion came quickly. The attacking fleet's perfectly synchronized assault began to fragment. Ships that were meant to move as a single unit started to exhibit microscopic hesitations. Tactical algorithms began to produce increasingly erratic response patterns. Lyrax watched in growing amazement. "What are you doing?" The Jarin communication specialist asked, their scales flickering with a mixture of confusion and emerging respect. "I'm fighting a war without firing a single weapon," Emma responded. Her strategy exploited a fundamental weakness in the attacking coalition. They had planned for a conventional conflict, rigid, predictable, something that could be managed through overwhelming force. They hadn't anticipated an opponent who would fight on the psychological plane. The Nexus Prime colony's defensive systems, initially overwhelmed, began to stabilize. Emma was rewriting the tactical equation in real time, using the Rosetta Bridge to create a communication environment that was fundamentally incomprehensible to the attackers. Vornak, the senior administrative officer, began to understand. "She's not just defending," he muttered to Krelax. "She's redefining the entire concept of conflict." The attacking fleet's coordination began to collapse. Ships started to move at cross purposes. Tactical algorithms became increasingly erratic. What had been a precision strike was transforming into a chaotic retreat. Emma's final move was her most audacious. Using the Rosetta Bridge, she began to introduce communication patterns that highlighted the internal tensions within the attacking coalition. Species that had been reluctant allies began to question their commitment to the assault. Within hours, what was meant to be a decisive strike had transformed into a complete strategic failure. Krelax approached Emma, his color patterns suggesting a complex mixture of respect, fear, and emerging understanding. "You didn't just defend," he stated. "You dismantled an entire military strategy without firing a weapon." Emma's response was characteristic in its simplicity. Conflict is just a failure of communication. The Nexus Prime colony stood intact. The attacking fleet was in complete disarray. And humanity had just demonstrated a form of warfare that defied every known strategic doctrine in the galaxy. The universe was about to learn that the most dangerous weapon was not a battleship or a quantum cannon. It was a human mind that refused to accept the limitations others tried to impose. The grand chamber of the Jarin diplomatic vessel was unlike any human assembly hall. Crystalline surfaces shifted and breathed, reflecting the emotional states of those within. Hundreds of high-ranking Jarin officials filled the space, their scales creating a living tapestry of color and tension. Emma Rodriguez stood at the center, surrounded by the most powerful entities in the known galaxy. This was no ordinary hearing. This was a moment that would reshape interstellar diplomacy forever. Krelax watched from an elevated platform, his scaled form a complex canvas of anticipation and uncertainty. The military faction that had sought to manipulate the diplomatic mission was present, their color patterns suggesting a mixture of anger and growing dread. "I will tell you everything," Emma began, her voice steady and clear. What followed was not a traditional report or diplomatic statement. It was a deconstruction of every assumption the Jarin had made about humanity, about diplomacy, about the nature of intelligent species. She revealed the full extent of her actions. The quantum communication breakthrough, the psychological warfare that had dismantled the attack on Nexus Prime, the intricate network of alliances she had built within the Jarin diplomatic corps. But more importantly, she revealed why. "Humanity is not what you think we are," Emma stated. Her words, translated through the Rosetta Bridge, carried layers of meaning that transcended simple language. We are not a species defined by our technology or our military might. We are defined by our ability to adapt, to understand, to connect. She walked them through her methodology, how she had identified the conspiracy, how she had systematically dismantled the military faction's plans, how she had transformed a potential interstellar conflict into an opportunity for unprecedented cooperation. The Rosetta Bridge projected holographic representations of her analysis. Complex mathematical models danced in the air, showing how human cognitive processes differed fundamentally from other species. But difference, she argued, was not a weakness. It was the most profound strength imaginable. Vornak, who had become an unlikely ally, stepped forward. His translation added weight to Emma's words. "She has done what no diplomatic mission in our history has ever accomplished," he stated. The implications hung in the air like a tangible force. The military faction's representatives tried to interrupt. Their color patterns suggested panic, desperation. But Emma was not finished. She revealed the deepest secret. The conspiracy against the diplomatic mission was not just about preventing human expansion. It was about maintaining a galactic status quo that was fundamentally broken. The attacking coalition had been manipulated by forces that feared true communication, true understanding. "Chaos is not our enemy," Emma explained. "Chaos is our greatest tool of innovation." Lyrax, the junior communication specialist who had been her first unexpected ally, added a crucial piece of testimony. Their insights revealed how Emma had navigated the most complex social and technological landscape any species had ever encountered. The confession was more than a report. It was a complete reimagining of interspecies relationships. Emma was showing them that diplomacy was not about controlling information, but about creating new forms of understanding. Krulax finally understood. The human before them was not just a diplomatic asset. She was a revolutionary force that defied every known paradigm of galactic interaction. "You have changed everything," he stated. It was not an accusation. It was a recognition. Emma's final words were both a challenge and an invitation. "We are not here to conquer. We are here to connect, to learn, to grow together in ways no one has ever imagined." The chamber fell silent. The crystalline walls seemed to pulse with a new understanding. Humanity had just demonstrated that its greatest weapon was not technology or military might, but the ability to see beyond existing limitations. The universe would never be the same. The diplomatic vessel hung in the quantum-shifted space between star systems, a symbol of everything that had changed. What began as a potential catalyst for interstellar conflict had transformed into humanity's most significant moment of first contact. Emma Rodriguez stood at the primary viewing port, watching the complex dance of stellar phenomena. Krulax approached, his scaled form no longer a threat, but a representation of a new kind of partnership. "Your people continue to surprise us," he said, the translator rendering his words with a mixture of respect and genuine wonder. The Jaren had begun a complete revaluation of their understanding of humanity. The military faction that had sought to manipulate the diplomatic mission was now dismantled, its leaders reassigned to positions where their narrow thinking could no longer threaten galactic stability. Lyrax, the junior communication specialist who had been Emma's first unexpected ally, now headed a new interspecies communication initiative, the Rosetta Bridge. Emma's revolutionary communication technology had become the foundation of an entirely new diplomatic approach. But the true revolution was happening far beyond this single diplomatic mission. Human colonies that had once been viewed with suspicion were now being approached by multiple alien species. The attacking coalition that had attempted to strike Nexus Prime was now seeking diplomatic relations. Emma's demonstration of human potential had fundamentally altered the galactic power dynamics. "We're not conquering," Emma explained to Krulax during one of their frequent strategy sessions. "We're connecting. There's a difference." The difference was profound. Where previous galactic interactions had been characterized by rigid protocols and defensive posturing, humanity introduced a new paradigm: adaptability. Emotional intelligence, the ability to see potential where others saw only conflict. Vornak, The senior administrative officer, who had become a crucial ally, developed a comprehensive report on human cognitive abilities. The document became required reading across multiple alien civilizations. It revealed humanity not as a threat, but as a unique problem-solving species with unprecedented potential. The diplomatic vessel became a symbol of this new understanding. Its crystalline corridors now hosted representatives from species that had previously been bitter enemies. Human researchers worked alongside alien scientists, breaking down barriers that had existed for centuries. Emma's personal journey became a pivotal narrative. She was no longer just a researcher or a diplomatic asset. She had become a living example of humanity's greatest strengths: adaptability, creativity, and the ability to transform potential conflict into unprecedented cooperation. The Gerund leadership recognized that the traditional galactic power structures were obsolete. Humanity had introduced a fundamental shift in how intelligent species could interact. It wasn't about military might or technological superiority. It was about understanding, communication, and the willingness to see beyond existing limitations. Krillex understood now what his species had misunderstood for generations. Humanity was not a species to be feared or controlled. They were partners in a much larger cosmic journey of discovery. New diplomatic protocols emerged. The Rosetta Bridge became a standard communication tool, creating unprecedented levels of interspecies understanding. Research initiatives were launched, combining human creativity with alien technological expertise. Emma's diplomatic marriage, initially a potential source of conflict, became a symbol of a new kind of interstellar relationship. She and Krillex represented something more than a political arrangement. They represented the possibility of true understanding between fundamentally different species. The universe had changed, and humanity had played the most crucial role in that transformation. As the diplomatic vessel continued its journey, Emma looked out at the stars. Each point of light represented a possibility, a potential connection, a chance to learn, to grow, to understand. Humanity had just begun its true journey among the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same.